November 12, 2025, will likely be remembered as one of the most politically catastrophic days of Donald Trump's second presidency. A day so chaotic that even historians will struggle to explain how so many disasters converged at once. Washington didn't wake up to just one crisis. It woke up to three major, overlapping detonations that sent shockwaves across the country. First, after 43 agonizing days, the government shutdown, the longest in American history, finally crawled to an end. Second, the House Oversight Committee released 20,000 pages of Jeffrey Epstein's private emails and communications, instantly setting off alarms across the political system. And third, as if pouring gasoline on an already out-of-control fire, Stephen Colbert went live on national television and delivered a brutal monologue that instantly dominated the news cycle, social media, and political commentary. Trump should have owned the day. He should have stepped into the Oval Office, signed the funding bill, and declared victory. But instead, he found himself cornered, ambushed, and completely unable to focus on the shutdown ending, because reporters were waiting for him with questions he couldn't answer. Not about budgets, not about federal workers, not about policy. They shouted, "Mr. President, what about the Epstein's emails? Did you know about the girls? Why does Epstein say you were in his house with victims?" Suddenly, the shutdown wasn't the headline anymore. The Epstein leaks were. To understand why the day was so volatile, you have to understand what the shutdown represented. For 6 straight weeks, the federal government was at a standstill. Agencies were ghost towns. Millions of Americans were thrown into uncertainty. Federal workers went weeks without paychecks. Air travel slowed because TSA agents were working for free. Nutrition programs for children were slashed. Veterans' benefits were delayed. Scientists, inspectors, analysts, and essential personnel were basically praying for the impasse to break. It wasn't just a budget fight. It was a test of national endurance. The root of the battle was simple but painful. Republicans refused to extend Affordable Care Act subsidies that millions relied on for health insurance. Democrats refused to pass any spending bill without those protections. And so, the country suffered. Stephen Colbert covered it relentlessly. Every night, he hammered the administration's incompetence, mocking the shutdown as a national embarrassment. In October, he joked that the Capitol has officially turned into a spirit Halloween, because any building left empty long enough eventually does. But the humor turned sharp when Democrats folded on day 41. They agreed to a deal without securing the healthcare subsidies they fought for. Colbert did not hold back. He called Senator Jeanne Shaheen out by name, saying she crumbled like a granola bar in your backpack. It was brutal, biting, and exactly the kind of commentary that gets replayed over and over online. Then Jon Stewart joined the attack. "You had the wind at your back," he said on The Daily Show, furious at the capitulation. "Democrats, you sold out the entire shutdown not to get what you want, but for a promise you won't get it later." The narrative was clear. Washington failed. Millions suffered for nothing. And right when the bill was finally signed into law to end the shutdown, something unthinkable happened. The Epstein documents dropped. At approximately 11:30 a.m., the House Oversight Committee made an announcement that immediately overshadowed everything else. They had received and releasing 20,000 pages of emails, transcripts, messages, attachments, and communications directly from Jeffrey Epstein. Within minutes, leaks began appearing online. Reporters, analysts, and researchers dove into the avalanche of documents. And it didn't take long for Trump's name to rise to the surface, not once, not twice, but repeatedly, over and over, across hundreds of pages. Within 1 hour, Twitter, YouTube, and cable news were consumed. The shutdown, once the biggest political story in America, was instantly pushed aside. This wasn't a slow scandal. It was a detonation. Because these weren't allegations from Epstein's enemies. These were Epstein's own words. Private messages, confidential emails, notes to world leaders, journalists, lawyers, business partners, and political insiders. Emails to Ghislaine Maxwell. Emails to Russian contacts. Emails referencing Trump Tower. Emails describing Trump's behavior around girls. Emails mocking Trump's intelligence. Emails discussing foreign governments and U.S. politics. Emails referencing secret meetings. Emails tracking Trump's personal plane. Trump's name appeared so often that analysts had to build databases just to keep track. And this was only the first batch. By evening, Stephen Colbert took the stage for his show, and instead of opening with jokes about the shutdown ending, he launched directly into the Epstein story. It was surgical. It was devastating. It was watched by millions. Colbert reminded viewers of Trump's long relationship with Epstein. He showed screenshots of the new emails. He played clips of Trump denying involvement. And then, with his signature precision, he tore into the hypocrisy. One line went viral immediately. "It's never a good sign when Jeffrey Epstein is trying to help you draft your statements, like some perverted version of Clippy saying, 'Looks like you're trying to avoid questions about sex crimes. Need help with that?'" The internet erupted. Colbert's monologue became the #1 trending video within hours. And the next morning, CNN, MSNBC, podcasts, TikTok pages, and YouTube channels were all talking about the same thing. Not the shutdown, not the reopening of the government, not the budget deal, but what Epstein said about Trump. Suddenly, Trump wasn't the leader who ended the shutdown. He was the president surrounded by a scandal he couldn't dodge. When analysts began digging through the 20,000 pages of Epstein's communications, one thing became immediately clear. Donald Trump's name wasn't a footnote. It wasn't an occasional reference. It was recurring, detailed, and placed directly inside Epstein's private conversations with world leaders, journalists, lawyers, and longtime associates. This wasn't secondhand gossip. These were Epstein's own words, written long before anyone imagined they would become public. And the picture they painted was far more alarming than anyone expected. One of the earliest and most revealing messages came from April 2, 2011. Epstein wrote to Ghislaine Maxwell, "The dog that hasn't barked is Trump. Victim redacted, spent hours at my house with him. He has never once been mentioned." This statement was significant. Epstein wasn't speculating. He was describing someone he believed he knew well. Someone he expected to have been implicated during earlier investigations, yet Trump had somehow remained untouched. Maxwell replied, "I've been thinking about that." That single line confirmed she understood the implication. They both knew who had been in Epstein's home. They both knew who had been around Epstein's victims. And they both knew Trump had avoided public scrutiny. In another exchange years later, Epstein wrote to journalist Michael Wolff about Trump's awareness of recruitment happening near Mar-a-Lago. Of course he knew about the girls. Of course he did. They were best pals. He asked Ghislaine to stop recruiting from Mar-a-Lago. This wasn't phrased cautiously. Epstein stated it plainly, as if it were obvious. If true, this email implies 3 things. 1. Trump knew about the underage girls. 2. He knew Ghislaine Maxwell was recruiting near or from Mar-a-Lago. 3. He asked her to stop, not because it was wrong, but because it was too close to him. Another message showed Epstein coaching Trump on how to respond to media questions. CNN was preparing to ask Trump about his relationship with Epstein. Epstein reached out, offering what sounded like PR guidance. This was one of the most revealing moments because it suggested a level of coordination and comfort between the two. Not just acquaintances, not just social contacts. A relationship where Epstein felt comfortable stepping in to protect Trump. Epstein didn't speak kindly about Trump behind closed doors. To Larry Summers, Epstein wrote, "Your world does not understand how dumb he really is. He will blame everyone around him for bad results." To another associate, when discussing Trump's appearance and behavior, "Worse in real life, up close." These weren't political attacks. These were private opinions shared with colleagues and friends. One of the most disturbing emails involved Epstein describing how he gave Trump a young woman. The message was casual, as if he were discussing an object and not a human being. Epstein wrote, "My 20-year-old girlfriend in 1993, after 2 years, I gave her to Donald." He referred to her as fully depreciated, a phrase that horrified investigators and readers alike. Whether literal or exaggerated, the fact that Epstein felt comfortable typing this at all said everything about the environment they operated in. The emails weren't only about women. Some dealt with geopolitics. In one email to former Norwegian Prime Minister Thorbjørn Jagland, Epstein described being in communication with high-ranking Russian officials before Trump's Helsinki summit. Epstein wrote, "You might suggest to Putin that Lavrov can get insight from me before Helsinki. Vitalen used to, but he died." Jagland replied he would meet with one of Lavrov's assistants. Epstein was positioning himself as an informal advisor to foreign governments, while repeatedly referencing Trump in those conversations. He wasn't bragging, he was coordinating. One of the emails that immediately drew national attention came from November 2016. Linda Stone asked Epstein where he was. Epstein replied, "I'm in the Trump Tower." This message contradicted Trump's long-standing public claim that he hadn't had contact with Epstein since around 2003. Yet here Epstein was, saying he was inside Trump Tower right after Trump won the presidency. Even if he wasn't meeting Trump directly, his presence there raised significant questions. Across several emails, Epstein received updates about Trump's personal Boeing 75 aircraft. Dates, times, airport movements. Epstein had access to details not normally available to the public. These updates didn't appear random. They looked like someone on the inside was feeding him information. It suggested a level of access that went far beyond casual acquaintance. Another email discussed a $30 million backdated loan connected to Trump during his Atlantic City years. Epstein referenced an individual he called the Bagman, someone who allegedly handled cash for Trump through an electricians union connection. He also mentioned someone being beaten up by Trump promoter in a separate message. These emails pointed to financial and legal entanglements outside the scope of Epstein's sex crimes, but still tied directly to Trump. A 2009 communication referenced a deposition notice for Trump regarding a Jane Doe connected to Maxwell's legal issues. The email didn't prove Trump appeared, but the fact that a deposition was scheduled at all became another puzzle piece investigators flagged. After hundreds of emails, the pattern was unmistakable. 1. Epstein was deeply aware of Trump's behavior. 2. Trump was present in Epstein's social, financial, and political circles. Epstein tracked Trump's activities with precision. The relationship continued longer than Trump publicly claimed. There were references to victims, plane movements, Trump Tower visits, foreign governments, and money. These weren't vague associations. They were consistent. They were detailed. They were in Epstein's own words. And they were now public, right as Trump was trying to recover from a 43-day shutdown. The leaks took over every media outlet. Washington froze. Trump panicked. And the pressure was only beginning to build. The moment the Epstein emails hit the public, Washington shifted from confusion to crisis mode. What had started as a routine document release instantly turned into a bipartisan political upheaval. Members of Congress realized the 20,000 pages were only a fraction of what the Department of Justice still held in sealed files. Flight logs, financial records, correspondence, visitor lists, internal memos, and unredacted testimony. For months, two representatives, Republican Thomas Massey and Democrat Ro Khanna, had been working quietly on a discharge petition. This petition would force a House vote requiring the DOJ to release all Epstein files, not just the selective drops from the estate. The requirement was simple: 218 signatures, a majority of the House. For weeks, they were stuck just short of the number. Leadership didn't want to touch it. Lobbyists pushed against it. Political strategists warned it would create chaos. But after the email dump went public, momentum shifted instantly. That same afternoon, Representative Adelita Grijalva, who had been unable to take office for 50 days because the government shutdown had frozen administrative procedures, was finally sworn in. And her first act was signing the petition. Her signature became the historic number 218. For the first time, Congress would be forced to vote on full Epstein transparency. No delays, no procedural blocks, no excuses. The political shockwave was immediate. Trump reacted within hours. According to reporting from multiple outlets, he personally called several Republican representatives who signed the petition, urging them to withdraw their names. Two of the most notable were Nancy Mace and Lauren Boebert. Both are conservatives who typically support Trump, but this time the pressure did not work. Nancy Mace, a survivor of sexual assault, responded publicly, "I will never abandon other survivors." Her refusal was a major blow to Trump. Lauren Boebert also refused to remove her signature. Despite denying being pressured, she stated clearly she intended to keep her name attached. Then came the surprise. Marjorie Taylor Greene also refused to back down. For a close Trump ally like her to defy him on anything, even once, was unprecedented. It signaled that this wasn't a normal political fight. Even Trump's loyalists understood how serious the situation had become. Behind the scenes, Trump escalated his efforts. Reports indicated he even pulled key Republican members into the White House Situation Room, a room reserved for national security crises, to personally pressure them away from releasing the full Epstein archive. But the momentum had already shifted out of his control. Representatives on both sides began speaking publicly about survivor protection, transparency, and government accountability. The debate was no longer about Trump. It was about the entire system that allowed Epstein to operate for decades. And in that environment, defending secrecy became politically impossible. As more members of Congress reviewed the documents quietly provided to committee leaders, what they found only intensified their resolve. Within hours, people connected to the Oversight Committee were describing the remaining DOJ files as far more extensive than expected. Hundreds of pages of sealed testimony, cross-agency communications, financial transactions tied to known associates, undisclosed flight logs. The contents were so sensitive that even senior staffers were required to sign new confidentiality agreements before reviewing them. It was clear the 20,000 pages released publicly were only the surface. Trump understood this. His advisors understood it, and panic began spreading throughout the West Wing. Staffers described a tense atmosphere, confusion, and fractured internal communication. The administration was already strained after the 43-day shutdown. The Epstein leaks pushed it to the edge. Once the discharge petition reached 218 signatures, something else happened, something few expected. Federal employees who worked on Epstein-related cases, some going back more than a decade, began reaching out anonymously to journalists, attorneys, and congressional staff. They referenced investigations that were shut down prematurely, evidence that was minimized or sidelined, directives from higher-ups that limited the scope, communications between agencies that were never acted on. Most whistleblowers refused to go public, at least not yet. But their leaks were enough to ignite new inquiries inside multiple agencies. By the second day, the Office of Inspector General had received requests from members of Congress to review how Epstein cases were handled from 2006 to 2019. The Justice Department was asked to preserve all internal records. Two former FBI officials publicly called for a multi-agency audit. Washington was no longer dealing with a scandal. It was dealing with a structural failure, one that spanned administrations, departments, and decades. Cable networks adjusted their programming. Morning shows shifted their lead stories. Newspapers ran extended investigative sections. Independent reporters dug through the documents around the clock. Within 48 hours, multiple outlets confirmed Trump appeared in more emails than anyone expected. Several references contradicted his public claims about when he last spoke to Epstein. There were mentions of Trump Tower, Mar-a-Lago, and undisclosed meetings. Financial messages involving Trump's businesses raised new questions. Some emails referenced victims connected to Trump's presence at Epstein's events. The White House attempted to dismiss the emails as meaningless, but the volume and consistency made that nearly impossible. These were not accusations from political opponents. They were Epstein's own communications. Multiple journalists noted that Epstein wrote about Trump casually, as someone he regularly interacted with, observed, advised, and discussed with others. The story was growing faster than the administration could respond. For millions of Americans who had just endured a 43-day government shutdown, the Epstein revelations struck a nerve. People were angry, not just at Trump, not just at the emails, but at the idea that information had been hidden for so long. Victims' advocacy groups began pushing Congress to vote quickly on releasing the full archive. Hashtags calling for transparency trended across social media platforms. Activists demanded accountability not only from Trump, but from everyone who had connections to Epstein. For the first time in decades, the country was united on something. The truth needed to come out, and the pressure on Trump intensified. The White House attempted multiple strategies: dismiss the emails, deny their interpretations, blame Democrats, attack the media, shift attention to the shutdown, call the leaks politically motivated. But none of it worked. Every hour, new documents surfaced, new connections appeared, new inconsistencies emerged. Trump's own previous statements about Epstein were replayed and compared to new evidence. The administration was stuck between two realities. One, the shutdown had already weakened Trump's political standing. Two, the Epstein emails were now threatening to damage him permanently. As Washington processed the implications of the Epstein emails and the sudden bipartisan push for full transparency, public attention shifted toward one unexpected figure: Stephen Colbert. The late-night host, who had been covering Trump's shutdown and political missteps for weeks, became the unexpected voice shaping how millions of Americans understood the unfolding scandal. On the night the emails were released, Colbert delivered a monologue that instantly set the tone for the national conversation. His coverage wasn't comedic fluff. It was a structured rundown of the facts, delivered with clarity and precision. He highlighted how Epstein's private communications contradicted Trump's public statements. He showcased excerpts from the emails that referenced Trump directly. And he drew attention to the timing: the shutdown ending, the document dump, and the rapid shift in political energy. Colbert reminded viewers of Trump's long-standing efforts to distance himself from Epstein, and he contrasted those claims with Epstein's actual emails. What stood out wasn't just the content, but the framing. Colbert treated each revelation as a matter of public interest, laying out dates, quotes, and context. His monologue became the most viewed clip of the week across multiple platforms, shared by journalists, activists, and ordinary viewers trying to make sense of what had just happened. Trump was furious, not only because Colbert's coverage went viral, but because days earlier, Trump had mocked Colbert online after CBS announced his show would end in May 2026. Trump wrote that he loved Colbert was being canceled. Colbert responded with a short, blunt message that trended worldwide. But now, with his show entering its final months, Colbert appeared energized, focused, and unconcerned about political backlash. His coverage of the Epstein files had not only resonated with viewers, it had pushed the story further into mainstream discussion. Inside the White House, the atmosphere shifted from frustration to crisis. Staff members struggled to prepare a unified response to the documents. The press office released a statement claiming the emails proved nothing. But reporters immediately challenged that statement, citing several messages that directly contradicted Trump's previous public comments. At press briefings, questions escalated. Why was Epstein emailing about Trump Tower in 2016? How did Epstein know Trump's flight schedules in 2019? Why did Epstein describe Trump meeting victims in his home? Did Trump ask Maxwell to stop recruiting near Mar-a-Lago? None of these questions received meaningful answers. Each briefing ended the same way: vague denials, no specifics, and growing tension between the press corps and the administration. This created a feedback loop. The more the White House avoided details, the more journalists dug into the documents, and the more the public demanded clarity. The discharge petition had reached the required 218 signatures, but that was only the first step. A House vote would now be scheduled to determine whether the full Epstein archive, thousands of sealed records, would be released. Behind the scenes, lawmakers began preparing for a political battle unlike anything in recent history. The sealed files included unredacted flight logs, surveillance reports, financial records tracing payments, internal memos from multiple agencies, victim testimony, visitor records from Epstein's properties, and communications between Epstein and high-profile figures. Some members feared the release would trigger legal battles. Others believed it was the only way to restore public trust. Victims' advocates argued the information had been hidden long enough. Trump privately pushed Republican leadership to delay or block the vote, but the problem was bigger than party loyalty. This was now a national issue tied to survivor justice, bipartisan pressure, and intense media scrutiny. Blocking transparency risked political suicide. Sources inside Congress said the vote was likely to pass. Outside Washington, the public reaction grew louder with each passing day. Across social media, demands for the full release trended under multiple hashtags. People shared clips from the leaked emails, timelines of Trump's relationship with Epstein, and analyses of their overlapping circles spanning decades. Victims' organizations called on Congress to act swiftly. They argued that the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, was necessary for accountability. Even apolitical Americans began paying attention. The combination of the shutdown and the email leak created a sense of national frustration. People wanted answers about how someone like Epstein had operated openly for decades, crossing paths with business leaders, politicians, and entertainers without meaningful consequences. This outrage gave momentum to the push for transparency. Within days, reports emerged of internal disagreements inside Trump's inner circle. Some advisors urged him to focus on economic messaging and move past the story. Others argued he needed an aggressive defense, attacking the legitimacy of the emails. Trump, known for reacting emotionally to public criticism, struggled to stick to any coordinated strategy. He released posts online attacking Colbert and calling the leaked emails fake, but the volume of messages and the timestamps made that claim difficult to defend. The emails included years of communication, forwarded attachments, foreign language exchanges, and details that matched known events. Every attempted denial was met with more questions. Journalists compared Trump's statements with Epstein's messages line by line. Independent analysts highlighted contradictions between Trump's past interviews and newly uncovered emails. Legal experts discussed potential risks if any information suggested knowledge of wrongdoing. The administration found itself cornered, unable to shift public attention back to the shutdown or legislative priorities. Colbert wasn't the only one discussing the story, but his monologues carried an unusual weight. With his show ending in a matter of months, he became bolder in the topics he covered and the clarity with which he presented them. Each night, he focused on a specific set of emails, adding incremental context. His coverage kept the scandal alive in the public consciousness and made it harder for the White House to move on. Viewers who might normally avoid political news were now watching clips shared across social media. Colbert framed each segment as a public record, documenting what was said, when it was said, and why the timeline mattered. His breakdowns became part of the National Archive of the story. The irony was undeniable. Trump had celebrated the cancellation of Colbert's show, but now Colbert, free from worrying about long-term consequences, was becoming one of the most significant voices documenting the scandal. Trump couldn't escape the narrative. The shutdown had weakened him, the emails threatened to expose him, and Colbert ensured the story reached millions. The government was only funded through January. Another shutdown was possible. The House was preparing to vote on releasing the remaining Epstein files. Whistleblowers had begun to contact investigators. Journalists were uncovering more connections daily, and Colbert had months left on the air. This wasn't the end of the story. It wasn't even the middle. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would determine how much of the truth the public would finally see.